Installing this kit will require you to remove the front bumper and disassemble significant parts of the front of the car. This video assumes that the installer is a qualified technician who is experienced with working on BMWs. This is not a bolt-by-bolt explanation of how to disassemble and reassemble the car. Before starting, please review the included parts list and confirm that you have all the parts. You will be installing one new heat exchanger as well as making some modifications to the plastic shrouds around the front radiator. Modifications consist of cutting off some small parts of plastic and drilling holes for the new cooler hoses to pass through. We have found that a large stepped unibit works best for the holes you will be drilling. Plastic cutting can be done using a small air saw or a sharp box knife. Begin by removing the front half of the driver's side and passenger side fender liners as well as the front bumper. With the bumper off, you can now go ahead and remove the driver's side headlight, both stress braces, the radiator locating plate, the core support brace, as well as the core support. All right, now that you've removed all the pieces we recently spoke about, we are now looking at the driver's side front of the car. This is with the headlight out. We're gonna now make our cooler hose provisions in the radiator cooling duct. The first one we're gonna make is the top hose. You're gonna measure up from this flat surface 9/16 of an inch and make a mark. And you are then gonna measure from this forward facing surface 7/8 and make a mark. And where those intersect, you're gonna drill out to 1.25 inches. Okay, once you're satisfied with the upper hose provision, we can now move on to the lower hose provision. You'll notice on the stock ducting, ours is already cut, but this little tab here will extend up into where we're gonna drill our hole. So we'll have to cut that off before we do that. So using a box knife or an air saw, you can just cut down the face of the cooler and over, making sure not to cut it too low that you don't retain this wiring harness. So about an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch above the wiring harness should be safe. And then to mark out the hose provision, you're gonna measure over from this face of the cooler. You're gonna measure over about 5/8 of an inch. And then from the base down here, you're gonna measure 1 inch and 5/8, and where those two intersect, you can drill your hole. After you've marked it out, you can then drill that hole to 1 1/8 inches. Okay, now we are going to move on to installing the heat exchanger. Before we start, you can remove the plastic radiator protector that slides into the factory little mounts on the radiator. We're gonna use those to mount our cooler. So you'll need to locate your driver's side bracket and your passenger side bracket and go ahead and slip those into the factory cooler guard. Okay, once you've installed your brackets, go ahead and locate your cooler. The ports are obviously, they're gonna face the driver's side of the car. And you can slide the cooler in. And with it kind of setting there with the supplied hardware, you can then bolt the cooler to the side brackets. Once your cooler is installed and your hardware's tight, we can now move on to making our hose connections. Okay, before we begin to cut our hoses, you will need to drain the coolant. We're on the driver's side of the car looking at the factory heat exchanger hose. If you just pull the factory clip back and pull the hose down, you can drain the coolant. Ours is currently already drained. Make sure you have a catch pan underneath. You will make a mess if you don't. Okay, we are now ready to make our first hose connection. We're gonna do that on the driver's side of the car, looking at the upper factory heat exchanger hose. To make this connection, we're gonna have to cut the factory hose. To do that, you're gonna measure from this edge of the plastic factory Y fitting. You're gonna measure 1 3/4 inches and make your cut. To do that, it's a little tricky to get in there and do. We found the easiest way to do it is with a box knife, doing your best to make the cut as clean as possible. Okay, after you've made your cut, you're gonna go and locate one of the 2 Y fittings in the kit. The one you're looking for has the larger straight section. I don't know if you can see the difference, but there is one with a noticeably larger straight section. That's the one we're gonna use for the upper hose. And you're gonna insert that into the factory hose we just cut using these 2 connections to the factory hose with your bottom port facing forward and down. Okay, once you have cut your hose and you've installed your Y fitting, it should look something similar to this, with the bottom leg of the Y fitting towards the ground and facing the front of the car. You're then going to locate your upper heat exchanger hose. It's the shorter of the 2 hoses included in the kit. The long leg is going to go to the cooler. The short leg is going to go to the Y fitting. Okay, once you've installed your upper hose and you've made all your connections and your hose clamps are tight, we can now move on to doing the lower hose connection. All right, to access the hose that we're gonna need to modify to make our lower hose connection, you will need to remove this plastic fender liner cover piece. All right, we are now ready to make our lower hose modification. We are currently on the driver's side of the vehicle, looking through the fender well, through behind the plastic piece that we just had you remove. This is the bottom of the front frame horn on the driver's side. Obviously, this is your steering rack. The hose you're looking for is just above the steering rack, and it plugs into the water pump that pumps water for the heat exchanger system. To make this modification, you are going to measure from the front of this hose clamp here 3 3/8 inch back and make your mark. From that, you will measure 1/2 inch and make another mark. You are going to cut on both of those marks, cutting out the center section of 1/2 inch. And now you can move forward with installing your second Y fitting. Okay, with your Y fitting installed, it should look something similar to this. We're looking up at it from the bottom side. This is the front of the car. This is the back of the car. Your Y fitting is installed here with the Y facing the front of the car and up on the top side. Once you are confident you have that installed correctly, we can move forward with installing the final hose. Okay, we're ready to install our bottom hose. It's the longer of the 2, and the long section with the single 90 is going to go to the bottom cooler connection. The other end is going to get routed through on top of the front frame horn on the driver's side and down to our Y fitting. You're going to route it through all of the headlight bracket and the hood latch bracket. And it is a little bit of a pain in the butt. Once you kind of get it in place, you can kind of work it into spot. Just wanted to note that to make sure you have your hose in the right spot, it should be coming and turning down right after the AC unit on the frame rail. If it is not, you won't be able to locate it properly on your Y fitting. Once you're happy with your hose routing and you're confident it's in the right location and you can connect it to your Y fitting, make that connection, and then go through and make sure all of your hose clamps are properly tightened, and we can move on to the bleeding procedure. Okay, before we reinstall all the previous parts that have been removed, we are going to bleed the cooling system by removing the bleed port screw on the top of the heat exchanger you just installed. Once you've removed it, you can now fill the low temps side of the cooling system with factory BMW coolant until you see it start to bubble out of the bleed hole. All right, once you have bled the system, you can now reinstall your bleeding screw and move on to the factory BMW bleeding procedure. Once you have bled the cooling system and you've done it at least 3 times and you're confident there are no leaks, you can now reinstall all the parts that you previously took off.